how do we give our best to the workplace? And that gets messy because that means that nobody gives their best 9 to 5 Monday through Friday.
Right.
Sometimes you're excited at 5:30 in the morning to work, and sometimes you're done at 2. And so creating a team environment where those things can be talked about and people can kind of get what they need. It also takes a certain type of leader, a sort of a transformational leader.
I was going to say that, yeah, because there's letting go of some control there.
100%.
Sure.
But the thing we know about human beings is that human beings need autonomy. And so when you start micromanaging people and dictating, you don't get their best. So the types of leaders that really lead teams that flourish understand human behavior, and they understand that people do best when they're personally invested in the project and the team, when they're given autonomy to do the work they want to, and when they can align their work with a purpose.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Little Fish Podcast, where we honor, celebrate, and learn from small business owners just like you. I'm Joel Eschenbach, and thanks for joining us today. We're going to dive right in. Today we have Natalie Johnson and Rebecca Johnson from ViDL Solutions. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
Yep.
I like to just go right into it because a name like ViDL Solutions, what does it mean? What do you guys do? Who wants to start?
I'll take that.
That was, there's a hesitation there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We always try to make space for each other here. So
Right.
maybe the easiest way to describe what we do is that we primarily focus on consulting and training and speaking for organizations who are interested in improving the health and performance of their employees and their company as a whole.
Okay.
We could talk a little bit more about what that means, but that's kind of the
Sure.
elevator pitch. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So that's any size organization?
Absolutely.
Or do you have like a minimum, maximum? Doesn't matter?
You know, it really doesn't matter. We have as small as maybe, I think our smallest client has about 50 employees and our largest is over 200,000. So it's
Wow.
a huge range.
Okay. So you go in, let's dig into that a little bit. You go in, you facilitate trainings. And what are some of the things you cover in these trainings? And
Well, we would, and we do a lot of training, but our entry point with organizations is not always training first. Sometimes we end up offering training services after doing some consulting. And
Okay.
so there's a couple of different avenues that we'd enter into a relationship with an organization with. Sometimes they come to us because they know that what they're doing around individual or organizational health currently isn't working as well as they'd hoped, or they're considering investing and they're not sure where to put the resources. So sometimes our work starts with consulting. Sometimes it does start with training, and all of our trainings in some way, shape, or form are around, you might say at a high level, helping people become better versions of themselves. So specifically, we do a lot of leadership development training.
okay.
But we kind of take a different slant on that than most organizations, and we do a lot of training for intact work teams.
Okay. What's an intact work team?
So an intact work team is in an organization. There are teams that might be as small as a few people, might be as large as 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, who
Okay.
generally all report up to one person and maybe are all working on one project. It often has to do with, who reports up to one person.
Gotcha.
How does the team... We oftentimes work at the team level, because if what you're looking to do is improve organizational culture and individual well-being, that's often most impacted at the team level. Natalie, I might not have
Well, and I
described
think
Yeah,
when I think about intact team, I think, are they all working for the same company, or is it open enrollment? We have people from everywhere.
Okay.
So that also is this an intact team that they're in the same culture, same company, but working in different positions? And so we
Okay.
can talk more about the culture that exists within them, or is this more open enrollment and we could have lots of different cultures in the room?
Gotcha. Okay. So when you talk about wellness, it could be related to health, but you're also talking about emotional wellness. You're talking about psychological well-being, right? A lot of different
Yeah.
areas.
We have a model that we use to talk with business leaders and potential clients about what it really means to affect individual well-being, and we happen to divide that up into 5 categories:
Okay.
physical, emotional, social, financial, and professional.
Perfect.
In
Okay.
reality, they're all interrelated, and you don't really affect one without affecting the others.
Sure.
But those are the components of physical, individual well-being that we focus on.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yep.
Well, and I think when it comes to small businesses, a lot of times our clients don't necessarily know what it is that's going on, but they recognize things are happening within the company that are impacting the employees in a negative way. And so it might be that they're seeing things like there's a high turnover rate, or they might start seeing things like the culture doesn't feel good. It's not very positive. There's a lot of bickering, there's gossiping, there's issues with communication going on. And so sometimes those smaller companies that we work with don't really recognize specifically what the issue is, but they know they need to change and make it a healthier environment.
Right.
And so we provide that through individual strategies and training as well as more organizational.
Yeah, it's interesting because so many times you're running a business and there's the part of serving your clients, serving your customers. We're making the business happen. We're making the money come in the door, that part of it. But then you have your team.
Yeah.
And it's easy, I think, to neglect what's going on. And then all of a sudden it comes to the surface, right? Something's happening, bickering, there's people aren't showing up, people are, calling in, whatever it is. Yeah, that's I can see that would be helpful.
Yeah. And so thinking about that, most companies and most employees in companies spend a lot of time working in the business. They're thinking about finance and operations and strategy and marketing, and all that stuff is super important. But a lot of the work we do momentarily takes them out of working in the business so they can work on themselves and their interpersonal relationships and team dynamics, so that when they go back to the work at hand, they're more collaborative, they're more creative, they're physically, emotionally, socially in a better position. So I think you can think about the work we do as allowing people to step into the next best version of themselves, so when they go back to work on the business, they can contribute to the organization more and feel better while they're doing it.
I love that. And do you start with the leaders with that?
Ideally.
Okay, got it.
It doesn't always work out that way.
Sure.
For example, sometimes companies will come to us and say things, very traditional wellness, something like we have too many people using tobacco, or we have people that are really unhealthy within the organization. And so there's some physical issues
Symptoms.
going on.
Like,
Symptoms,
yeah.
But then when you get in there, you recognize, well, they've really got a lot of issues with communication and the way that they're treating each other. And so our entryway isn't necessarily through leadership, but when we're doing the consulting, we absolutely recommend that. That's where we need to start.
That's cool. Now, and we may get into this more, but when you go in and you work with leaders, you work with an organization, do you often get to see the results of what you've invested in the time in, and how that affects the company?
I wouldn't say often, because it depends on how they've brought us in.
Sure.
Some companies bring us in as little as once a year because they want us to be part of their annual training.
Gotcha.
So it's complementing what they're doing as a business and how they're training their people. So we wouldn't necessarily see the results of that. But companies that we work on long term, where we're doing consulting, we're really evaluating their population and then doing more a 1 to 5 year plan, we do get to see change happen.
Yeah, I bet. And obviously it takes time, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Anything. Yeah. Cool. Well, I want to step back and talk about your business. So we talked about what you do, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. But ViDL Solutions, tell me about kind of how you started, and maybe what's a challenge you ran into first out of the gate, because it doesn't take long to run into some sort of a challenge when you're running a business or starting a business.
I'm going to defer to Rebecca to talk about how ViDL itself started.
Okay.
Yeah. So I maybe, 4 or 5 years ago at this point, had an opportunity to work for a local organization who had another primary service, but they had this arm of the business around employee well-being. And it was sort of a little part of the business and wasn't really flourishing. And so they wanted someone to come in and kind of spruce up that component of the business. Like, let's do something really innovative around employee well-being. And I was fortunate enough to be able to lead that department. And in that role, I got to develop a model that I thought would be most effective for employers. And it was, honestly, completely out of the box. It was not the conventional employee wellness stuff. And it really looked at individual well-being through a new lens. And it also brought in the culture and system piece.
Okay.
And so in that role, I developed some intellectual property, a model, a way of thinking about it, some clients, some new services. And when that company was bought out, the new owners decided they wanted to focus primarily on their main bucket of business and this whole employee well-being thing. They weren't sure what to do with it. And so they said to me, do you have any interest in spinning this piece off and kind of running this business on your own? And I was not at the moment, like in the I wasn't at the point in my life where I would have said a month earlier, I'm excited about starting a business, because I'd done that once before. But the opportunity was so good. You know,
It just fell in your lap.
It fell in my lap. Yes. And so I made the decision that even though it felt a little risky to me, I was going to do it. And I thought the thing that would make this, optimal for me is to have a partner. And I knew just immediately Natalie popped into mind for me, because number one, you have to really like and trust someone that you're going to partner with.
That's true.
Key.
Yeah.
And number two, Natalie and I had worked together and known each other for probably a decade at that point. She was running a business on her own that did a lot of consulting and speaking and training in the same industry. She and I had worked together. I'd come and do work for her. She'd do some stuff for me. And I just knew her well enough to know I like this person. I trust her. And she also has a really valuable complementary skill set. She's good at a lot of things that I'm not. So I just called her up and I said, this crazy opportunity fell in my lap. Any interest? I didn't know what was going to happen. Any interest in partnering with me, and then I'll over to you.
Yeah, and I think the timing was good. And Rebecca and I had always thought it would be really great to work more formally together. We had known each other a long time, and periodically I would bring Rebecca in to help with some of my clients. And right at that given time, I had really felt like the actual work that I was doing with my consulting business didn't really match the message I was sending through the name of my company, through the message that was being sent out there. So I was in a place where I was really ready for some change. And it was just perfect timing on both parts.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
And that's so good about the partnership, the complementary skill set, liking each other, and not both having the same, position or agenda, complementing each other in that agenda. I mean, having the same agenda, but not, fighting one another, I guess, in that sense.
No, I think we're both clear that there's a common set of things, the actual consulting, speaking, and training we both do really well. There are areas that Natalie can get deeper in, and there's areas that I can get deeper in, and they're not the same. So we bring that together. But in terms of running a business, she's really good at connections and ideas and networking and bringing business and being really visionary. And I'm kind of a down in the weeds person. I love to, get closure on an idea and go execute it, and I love to be in the land of Word documents and spreadsheets. So it happens to work out really well. Yeah,
you gotta have
and
both.
I cringe.
Yeah, I hear you. I literally hate spreadsheets, so I understand.
I'm happy with a cup of coffee in an hour afternoon just in a
spreadsheet.
figuring out stuff.
But there's many people that love just living in the spreadsheet world.
Yeah, I don't want to be there all the time. But I think our ratio. I like to be out doing consulting and I like to be out in the world with people, maybe 50% of the time. And in-house, my quiet introverted self gets to recharge doing all the in the weeds stuff. And I'd say Natalie has a different ratio of being out versus being in.
Being out like 95% of the time. I like being out there in a spreadsheet like 0.01% of the time.
Like 0% of the time.
Yeah, pretty much.
I honestly can't keep track of where she is. I'm like, where are you flying to today?
That's fun. Yeah.
I'm at my kitchen table.
Yeah, and that takes a level of trust between the two of you. That she's just not off gallivanting everywhere and spending the company's money. And
Natalie is driven, and I everything she does, adds value to the business. Sometimes I'm like, would you slow down? Yeah.
Well, and it's I always, when I describe Rebecca to people, I'm always like, haven't you ever just met that person and you're like, oh, I need more of that. I need more of that focus. And I can feel the complement of her skill set with mine, even just in conversations and the way she speaks and the way she thinks. And it's just a really good complement.
Yeah. And I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. There's really nobody else I would have entered in. There wasn't one other person who was like, if this doesn't work out, I'll just try to run this thing on my own. But darn, I hope it works out.
Yeah. All right. Does that mean, Natalie, you get to tackle the problem? What was a challenge you ran into early on, maybe, or anytime? Doesn't have to just be early on.
And we've already mentioned it a little bit. I think part of it is that the message that we send of what we do. When we talk about, we work with different organizations on individual and organizational health and well-being, people immediately think of physical health. They think of nutrition. They think of exercise. And certainly that's a part of it, but it's such a small component. And so getting past that message and really being able to communicate with with the companies that we work with and potential clients that, yes, that's so important, but you can throw nutrition, education, and exercise all you want at people, and it's not going to make a difference if the culture doesn't support it and you don't look at the person more holistically as a whole person. And so I think it's definitely a struggle in the beginning, but it's also continues to be a conversation that we have. And how can we guide the conversation in a way that we're being really impactful? Because there's a lot of companies out there that would in a minute say, well, can you just bring in some nutrition classes and we'll pay for it?
We want to check it off the list.
Yes, yes.
Right.
And a lot of employers still think that way, that, and I call this old school wellness, that if we could just teach our employees how to be healthier, we'll save money on healthcare. And nothing in that statement is true or accurate. So
it's like dealing with the symptom and not what's underneath what's underneath it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to the point where I think we've even really started to pay attention to our language. I have even started to think about the word health is problematic itself. So, we are, the conversation has changed a little bit with prospective clients, and we usually start first with things like culture and team dynamics, and we go the opposite way, letting them know that individual health and well-being is a part of it. But the way that you more deeply impact your company is to kind of look at the system stuff. So anyway, we're really in the process of figuring out how do we need to change our language to make it more clear upfront what we do. I think we usually get there with clients anyway, but I think we could do a better job of our messaging. And because I don't know that there's any other organization that does what we do in the way that we do it. There's not a lot of other language out there. So we're kind of having to make it up as we go a little bit.
Yeah. That can be tricky.
Yeah.
Well, and I think another barrier that we face and conversations that we have to work through is a lot of times we'll work with physicians or nurses or healthcare systems. And so we come in to work with their employees, and those are professionals that have been trained to treat someone. They've been trained to tell someone what to do to get better, to get healthier, and then they're done. And so we're coming in and saying, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to really get to the source of what's going on here. And so that can sometimes be a barrier because they have been trained differently than what we're trying to accomplish. And so they'll bring us in through the door of, gosh, our employees are burning out like crazy. Turnover rate is really high. We want you to come in and do some resiliency training. And training them on resiliency is very different than what they were taught in school on how they treat their patients.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an example, right, that you're putting out there. I'm wondering, could we dig into an example like that a little bit? So resiliency training, for instance, like what does that mean? When someone say we're burning out our employees, because I think burning out your employees is a very practical problem. Maybe, that people deal with. So what does it look like? What kind of things are you covering? I mean, I know you can't go into all of it right now, but in a resiliency training.
So typically that's a training that focuses on the individual, and you're looking at things like, this is how I would like to show up. When I am the best version of myself, this is how I show up. This is how I connect. This is how I communicate. This is how I show up for my spouse, my kids, my patients. But in reality, here's how I'm actually showing up. And really being able to compare those two different versions of themselves. And the training specifically looks at, certainly there is some physical components to it. How do you take care of yourself? How does taking care of yourself contribute to you showing up as that best version of yourself? What type of emotions are showing up at work? Are you showing up irritable and impatient and angry and anxious? Or are you showing up as a better version, which would be I'm motivated and I'm excited? And so, not to get too far into the weeds, but the training on resiliency really focuses on looking at physical, emotional, mental, social well-being, but also beginning to understand what stress really is. There's a lot of new science out there that's telling us stress isn't bad at all. And a big issue with burnout is people view stress as bad. It's debilitating. It's impacting me negatively. And in all honesty, it doesn't have to be that way.
So it's kind of the mindset you have around stress.
Big part of it. It's a big part of it.
That's
and being
interesting.
and recognizing that you can change that perception, you can change your mindset, and when you change your mind, you change your body. And so those are examples of resiliency strategies.
And then we might, if we have the good fortune to have enough time with organizations, we might also then suggest that there's an add-on piece there, which is about how do we create resilient teams and organizations. And that's where we're looking at things like the way we treat each other, how we communicate, what our team dynamics are, what the culture is like. And we also talk a lot with people about what to do for yourself if you have your own personal resilience strategies, but your organization really doesn't support resilience, because sometimes in the company they're saying your health is important to us and we really want you to be able to do work-life balance well, but the policies and procedures and the norms of the company don't actually support that. So we can help people figure out what to do when there's a mismatch.
Yeah, that's so good. I feel like we could park here for a little while because this is really good stuff.
Yeah.
And this really relates to this. Ryan and I, we were talking about this. You have a mic on? Are you on? He's switching. He's on mic.
Almost.
I don't know if you're on.
Check.
There he is. So Ryan and I were talking about this the other day. So I obviously it's different among small businesses than large businesses. We have a team of 6, but we're trying to shift to this mindset. We have 2 of our employees are full-time remote.
Yeah.
One of them is full-time, but half in the office, half remote. And for the remote workers, there's kind of this built-in, they can kind of take their own schedule, right? They have a project list, they have things they need to get done, but I don't clock their hours. You know, they could get up and go to the gym, or they could get up and go for a walk or whatever. And I don't know that, but we're in the office together. And there's this idea, this old school idea that if we're in the office, you got to be here 9 to 5, you got to take a lunch break, you got to, and we've been talking about, what does it look like to turn that on its head a little bit? So especially us being in the creative business, you only have a certain amount of hours a day where your creative brain's going to function. And so when you talk about resiliency, like we're talking about, well, what does it look like for Ryan to come in and give his best for what are his best hours of the day to put out the most creative work he can? And at what point either does he need to shift functions and do something maybe not so creative?
Yeah, there's a point where like I'll be designing or we'll be doing creative work for 4 hours. It's the best I can get out of me. And then if I'm still continuing working on that stuff, it's going to actually create more work because it's not the best work that I could have been doing if I was in a fresh mind. Yeah. So then the next day I have to come back and I actually have to work on it. And I'm like, well, if I actually would have just taken a step or take a stop and like actually work on another day, I wouldn't have to waste my time that day.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good example of the types so when we're working with intact work teams, for example, we will bring up conversations about what do each of you need to give your best to the workplace. And ultimately, it's the team really needs to create some kind of shared guiding principles. You know, how do we give our best to the workplace? And that gets messy because that means that nobody gives their best 9 to 5 Monday through Friday.
Right.
Sometimes you're excited at 5:30 in the morning to work, and sometimes you're done at 2. And so creating a team environment where those things can be talked about and people can kind of get what they need. It also takes a certain type of leader, a sort of a transformational leader.
I was going to say that, yeah, because there's letting go of some control there.
100%.
Sure.
But the thing we know about human beings is that everybody needs, human beings need autonomy. And so when you start micromanaging people and dictating, you don't get their best. So the types of leaders that really lead teams that flourish understand human behavior, and they understand that people do best when they're personally invested in the project and the team, when they're given autonomy to do the work they want to, and when they can align their work with a purpose. And so you can see how that stuff, if you guys were able to work on the schedule that serves you best, think about how that would impact your own individual well-being.
Right.
You get to go home with more energy. You get to have time to work out or do whatever you want to do. So you can get to individual well-being by offering lots of programs and services. But the real way to get to improved individual well-being and performance is by creating these environments, these teams, these conditions where people can be treated like adults and, kind of get what they need out of the environment so they can give what the company really wants.
Yeah.
That's a great example.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
And you have that, I guess, flexibility that, when you say autonomy, flexibility, but also there's, I think, only so much you can get out of people by pushing them. But that is kind of that old school mindset of we got to push, we got to make sure you're working 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week or whatever it is. When in reality, you could probably almost get more out of them working less. I've seen that. I've read quite a few articles that a number of companies are trying to switch to a 4-day work week.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a trend. And it's interesting. Again, I think it would be hard. The bigger the company, the harder it is because you have so many different individual needs or preferences. I'm a morning person. I'm, like you said. But yeah, it's really cool, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts on that, Natalie?
What just came to mind here in talking is you asked a minute ago about the barriers that we faced as business owners. And I think, as employers, one of the barriers that they face is that a lot of them are still in this old school mentality. You got to come in 9 to 5, 8 to 4, whatever it is. But then in reality, people are leaving work and continuing to work and still plugged in. And that's why we get to the level of burnout. But that's not a barrier for us. Those are the people we can help the most. That's our ideal client, the people that are still in that old school mentality of we're going to push our clients, we're going to have them work all day, and then they're going to be responsible for checking in, after work hours. And then there's also another part of this where, and this comes up a lot in our trainings, where people will say the expectations and the demands are so high and I have to be on and plugged in 24/7. Do you really? Where's the truth behind that? Who has set that expectation for you? And 99% of the time, those expectations were internal expectations that someone's put on themselves. It wasn't necessary. The culture kind of pushes for that, but no, it's never really been the reality of what's expected from the company.
That's interesting. So it's really like the devices that push that, the notifications, emails, texts, whatever.
And the fact that maybe your manager and your colleagues are all doing it. And so when the workplace no longer supports work-life balance organically, and so that's making people have to honor boundaries and figure out what's really important to them and make changes that feel risky. If everybody else on your team or workplace is 24/7 connected and overworking, it can feel risky to be the one who says, I'm going to prioritize myself and my family, and I'm going to give the company my best, but in less time. And so that's why you need to be having the conversations about team and leadership, as well as giving people these individual strategies they can use, because the individual strategies people will only be able to take those so far if they really don't feel supported by their leader or their team or the company to actually create work-life balance.
The culture's not backing that up.
Right.
And I would imagine that among like millennials and younger, you're going to see even more of a push from them pushing back a little bit. At least that's been my experience. Is that, the younger generation's like, look, I get all this stuff. I don't want to just work. But if they're like that, and then they have a culture that is saying, no, we work all the time, we're always on, then you're right, that's hard to push against, especially if your job's on the line.
It is. And I heard this said about millennials the other day, and I thought it was so true, that millennials have a set of needs that are no different than all other human beings. They like autonomy and connecting to a purpose. But so do the rest of us. They just have more power and permission to say that and to demand it. And so the workplace is having to adjust. But what I love about millennials is that they simply demand the things that the rest of us want.
They do,
that baby boomers also wanted but didn't dare.
Right. They weren't allowed. They didn't have the permission.
They were not allowed. Yep.
Yeah.
I had I did a keynote not long ago, and it was to a huge audience of millennials, and they were literally, this was their onboarding to the company. And so they're right out of college.
Okay.
And it was a very quick keynote about self-care and resiliency and stress. And after the keynote, I was talking to a lot of them, and one of them said, we recognize this. We're already engaging in a lot of these things because we learned from people like our parents exactly what not to do. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Gosh, I want to go back real quick to what you said. We were talking about, you find that people, they put that stress on themselves, and the stress isn't coming externally necessarily. It could be supported by the culture.
Right.
But, just taking that time, we, sometimes I'll say to a few of our employees, like, turn off your phone. One of our employees is away actually today. It's a Friday through the weekend. And I told her, like, don't check your email, turn off your phone, because that's the thing. I have to do that too.
Right.
On the weekends, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take my phone and I'll put it away.
I do the same thing.
And then I'll have my iPad or whatever to do things, but I don't, on the iPad, I don't have the same apps and notifications. I turn all it off on my iPad. And it's because I'm addicted to it.
Yeah.
If it's dinging and the notifications are on, I'm going to look at it.
Yeah.
And I can't help it.
You and everybody else, and I think that's something that we have to come to terms with, is there's very few people I know who can have a cell phone around with notifications on and not be constantly distracted by it.
Yeah.
And I think most adult human beings at this point are addicted to their smartphones, seriously, in the same way that people are addicted to coffee and cigarettes.
Definitely.
And so I've had to and these are some of the individual strategies that we might suggest. We might get people thinking about, what do you need to do with your technology? What practices do you need to enact to save your sanity and your health? And also to then be giving more at work when you when you do go back to it.
Right. Because those things all add to that overwhelmed, even the stress, like you're saying. And even that was another thing I was thinking when you were saying that, is that stress that you view as bad. I know a lot of times for me, it's feeling overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed.
Me too.
And then if I take a step back and I go, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm not overwhelmed. Or that feeling of overwhelmed is feeling like I have to get everything done in this moment.
Yes.
And I just don't.
Yeah.
I just don't.
I have that a lot too. I think that's a product of our just modern society. Is there's this idea that we have so much to do, but a lot of the to-dos are like responding to 8 million forms of communication, and that we have to get that all done now. That is probably my biggest stressor too. So I feel you.
Yeah. Well, it's living in that place of just reacting to everything as it's coming. I'm going to react without pausing to think about, wait, do I really have to do this right now? Do I really have to do all 5 tasks right? What is it that's overwhelming me? And a lot of times it's just the different data coming from different places, but you need to pause and recognize we don't have to do all of this right now.
Or ever in some cases.
Or ever. Yeah. That's really good. Just let it go. Move on. So good. Well, back to your business, the side of things. If you had to, this is a question I ask everybody. I just find it such a fascinating question and answer, the way people answer it. If you had to look back and tell yourself something 5 years ago, now I think you started the business, Rebecca. I don't know exactly when you branched off.
Just a couple years ago.
Okay.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to be 5, but whatever you want to look back, what would you tell yourself that you've learned?
There's so much.
There is so much.
I can certainly go back 5 years. I feel like I've been in this industry long enough. And one of the most valuable things that I've learned is, we all go to school, we learn all these things. And in my occupation and in my training, I was trained to tell people what to do. And that comes back to anything from performance psychology to exercise to nutrition. That we were trained in school. You're the expert, put your expert hat on and help people. And I think something that's been so valuable to me was the realization that when you're telling people what to do, it doesn't really go that far. It's really important for people to connect to something more valuable within themselves and come to the solution themselves. And so learning to ask people the right questions so that they come up with the solution themselves and connect it to something more valuable. To their values, to their purpose, to whatever it is that's important to them. Because
does that take more time usually, do you find? When you're not just saying, okay, do step 1, step 2, step 3.
No, because because when you're saying do step 1, step 2, and step 3, people do it. They think you're the expert. I'm going to do it, and it lasts a very short amount of time, and then they fall off the wagon and they go back to their old habits. In the beginning, when you start asking, what would happen if you did make some change in your life? What will happen if it didn't? Where do you think you could start? They actually start smaller and more realistic. And this is, decisions based on individual well-being or company organizations, really digging into the why and trying not to be the expert that's telling people what to do makes people start smaller, but then they stick with it. So to answer your question, it doesn't necessarily take longer because it's now worthwhile.
Gotcha.
You know what? Okay. I think that's such a really important thing that I am learning in my life too, is that it's always more impactful when I ask one question rather than make 3 or 4 statements about what you should do. So if you in a group, in a training, I think we're both asking more and more questions. And so we'll ask a question like, in that situation, what's right for you? What does great look like for you? What do you need to do for you? The person will almost always have the answer, and their answer may be nothing that I would have said in my advice giving. And so sometimes you can actually get to something that's more impactful for people by asking 1 or 2 really powerful questions than by standing up there and preaching all day long.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's good. Would you have anything else you'd add about?
I guess about the business itself. The business felt risky to me. I am a single mom, so I'm a single income household, and I had owned a business previously, which ended fine. I'm still really good friends with my business partner, but we ended up with some debt to pay off. And I don't look back on that business experience negatively. I learned a lot from it, but it was kind of like, I thought, well, that was one and done. I'm not going to be a business owner again. And so when this opportunity landed in my lap, there were things about it that felt risky. And I think I would just go back and tell myself, it's all going to work out. Like, jump in both feet, which I guess I probably did anyway, but
Yeah.
now I have more confidence because it's working out.
Yeah,
So I would have
yeah.
just said to myself, don't worry, like leave all your worry behind. It's going to be great. Go for it. And I would have maybe allowed myself to skip through some of the worry.
Yeah.
Well, I think something
true.
we've both learned, and I'm kind of speaking for Rebecca here, but we've learned in this partnership that we really want to be doing the things that we love.
Yeah.
And there are different offerings and different things that we've offered in the past and still currently a little bit that it's work that neither one of us really want to be doing. Not only that, we don't feel like it's giving our clients much of a value, but people still want it. It's still an income for us. And so learning to shift away from the things that we're not even really enjoying doing, even though it could potentially be income, that's not really what's going to long-term benefit us. And so shifting away from those things that we know aren't valuable for us, we don't want to be doing them. And in the long run, it's not really valuable for our clients either.
Yeah.
So doing just what we've really gotten honed in on, what are the things we love to do? And
how do we make money at those?
And how do
Yeah.
we,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
honest,
Yeah.
those are the
Yeah.
more profitable ones anyway.
Yeah,
You know?
right.
So we're just kind of letting go of the little things, the things you did only for security, and just going 100% in on your messaging and marketing around what you love to do and what you think adds value.
Yeah,
good
that
point.
is so good. Yeah, all of that. I mean, and there is, I mean, I think there is risk, and that's why we do fall back to, these are the things we know make money because we've done them before and people want them. But yeah, ultimately you're right. There's something else. And I think there is some fear in the risk taking that you're talking about. You could tell yourself, because the truth is the stats show that I think the last I read it was 91% of businesses fail.
Wow.
In the first,
I'm
was it
glad
the
I
first
didn't know
5
that 2
years?
years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, it's really high. And interestingly enough, that rate has been going up.
Yes.
Wow.
So there's a lot against business owners, but even the word fail, I mean, like you said, what you were like, I'm a one and done business owner, but you did learn a lot from that first
have had
experience.
Any of the future, I mean, all of the then experiences after that, I attribute to the knowledge and experience and connections I gained during that.
Yeah,
I just
right.
never thought, I just kind of thought like, well, that was probably my only time as a business
That was
owner,
fun.
but life had different plans for me. So.
That's how I felt after I ran my one and only half marathon. I'm like, that was fun. I'll never do that again. And I haven't. So
It's more than I've done.
oh gosh. Oh, all right. So then thinking back, we thought back, let's think about moving forward. What does success look like for you in the next 5 years?
I'll take that one first
Yeah,
if you want.
yeah.
Okay, and because I think we maybe even have a similar answer here. I think, because we've actually talked about this, like where do we want the business to go? And I think it has to do with the last answer that Natalie gave, which is success to us looks like doing what we love, a lot of what we love and not very much of what we don't love, feeling like we're having a true impact, like we are offering a service to people and organizations that's actually valuable,
Yeah.
and making a business that's profitable enough for us to live comfortably. So those are my three. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with all three. I think especially early on as business owners, a lot of us have this drive to, we got to build the business, to go, go, go. We take every client, regardless of what it is that they need or want, we're going to take them all because we're trying to build the business. And I think moving forward, we don't really necessarily have to do that anymore. And so a big part of it for me is that balance of doing the work we love, but also having that downtime where we're really not having to work and not having to say yes to the clients that we know are not really the work that we enjoy doing.
Yeah, right. And I hear that theme a lot too, of getting to a point where you're just comfortable with what you do. Not comfortable in a bad way, comfortable in a
Right.
good way.
Yeah.
Not like lazy, but just like, hey, this is what we love doing. We're going to focus on that. We're going to figure out how to make the best profit doing that, and then live in this space.
Right.
Instead of that build, grow kind of thing.
I don't think either one of us have any desire to run an empire. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Like
Yeah.
we just want to do what we love and do it together. And I suspect we'll continue to grow, but I think both of us mentally have a cap where like we don't want to have the business overtake our lives, and so we'll let it grow. As I don't know when we'll stop, but it feels good right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Do you see yourself adding more team members at any point, do you think, or?
We've talked about it a little bit, and I kind of do see where eventually we're going to need at least one other consultant. I don't know when maybe that would be, but I would see that person being another person that would complement our skill sets or bring something different to the table, but also have some similar beliefs behind what we do. So I do see it in the future, but I don't know exactly when that would be.
Yeah.
So we're not hiring right now. No.
we're very, you're always kind of teetering on the balance of your work life to be full.
Yeah.
And so who knows? We'll see what this year brings.
And you might be right. I mean, we're always teetering on the balance, and maybe there is always an element of teetering on the balance.
Yes.
Do you? It's like, it seems like if you go too far one way or the other, I don't know. It's just too easy to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, if somebody has a company of really any size and they just need help, maybe their culture they're struggling with their culture, like you said before, bickering, or people just not feeling well or feeling accepted, or what do they need to do to get your help? What's the next steps for them?
Well, I think the obvious one, just reaching out to.
Okay, yeah. And then what's the process with that? What do you usually do?
Well, we would want to have a conversation with them. First and foremost, why they want to have this meeting. What are the biggest barriers that are top of mind right now? What are they struggling with? And then we would talk about how have they tried to address it so far? So have you done anything about this so far? Are there any systems or programs or anything in place where you've worked on it? And then how could we bring in complementary assets? So maybe there's already someone doing leadership development, or maybe their benefits plan is already supporting through some health coaches, or maybe they've already done some training on these topics. And so seeing where we fit in with that piece of the pie, because I don't think we ever expect we're going to come in and just do it all. We want to complement what they've already accomplished, what they're already doing, and fill in the gaps.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And so also we talked about before, you are certified in a few programs that people may know about.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So do you want to talk about that a little bit before we finish up?
Sure. So I am one of the Brene Brown Dare to Lead facilitators. And so I teach her Daring Leadership program, and it's anything from, I've done as short as a 45-minute keynote to we're moving towards a 24-hour training.
Okay.
And that really looks at a little bit of both, but probably a little bit more of organizational health. So how are we actually showing up to work? How can we create more connections with people? How can we create a thriving workforce through people that really appreciate each other, are connected, and are in a place where they feel safe enough to talk about topics that you wouldn't traditionally talk about at work before now. So things like what you need to show up as the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
What do you need in your supervisor? How could you be a little bit more vulnerable as a leader in talking to your team so that you're not telling them what to do, but you're motivating them through something that's important to them. So that's one of them that I'm certified in. And then Rebecca also.
And I am certified in a complementary program called Developing a Leadership Mindset. And that's one of those programs that we try to deliver again to those intact work teams. So the groups of people in an organization who really work closely together. And it's delivered in 3 parts. The first is about self. So I examine my own self-awareness and I understand the thinking behind my choices. And I really start to think about how am I showing up in the workplace and what's the work that I as a person need to do? Like how do I step up my own game? And we have lots of, we call it kind of upgrading our inner operating system. And then the second part of that focuses on the team dynamic. So communication, conflict resolution, creating psychological safety.
Okay.
And then the third part of the program helps the team put together a set of shared guiding principles about what our values are, what it looks like to work on this team, what are the behaviors that are acceptable and unacceptable, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to that. So developing a leadership mindset is kind of self, team, and then values and behaviors. And I think the programs work well together. They're maybe for slightly different audiences, but I think between the two of those and some of the other, kind of customized leadership development trainings that we offer, I think most organizations could really cover their bases and get what
definitely.
they need.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love it. So they can go to your website, ViDLSolutions.com. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, but it's ViDL.
Yes, and it's not ViDL.
It's not ViDL. It's Vital. Yeah.
The name, I have to say, the name came with the business and it was already trademarked and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a funny name. We have people say, is it ViDL or ViDL?
ViDL.
Always sounds like kitty litter to me.
Yeah.
Like, it's not ViDL.
Well, you always run that risk when you go with a different spelling. But
Yes.
the upside to going with different spellings is you have more domain name options. You're not
it was
stuck.
easily trademarkable, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So I
So
get
it's
it.
ViDLSolutions.com.
ViDLSolutions.com.
VIDL. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being on the podcast. Again, I've learned a lot. It's been really good. We could keep talking. There's a couple of those subjects we went into. I was like, we could keep going on those, but for the sake of time, we'll finish it. So again, thanks for being here on this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Joel.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us in this episode. If you'll like and subscribe on YouTube, if you're an audio listener, we'd love it if you'd leave a 5-star review on iTunes and subscribe. And thanks again.